George Compte, of course, was the top boss at WTMJ Radio and TV. He was the vice president of the company and general manager of radio and television. And I always thought he was a real gentleman, a good man to work for.
George Compte was the manager of everything, WTMJ, AM and TV, and the FM station as well. And he was a retired colonel, and he was called Colonel Compte a lot around here. It was a title of respect and of understanding how he operated. I wrote an editorial which was critical of the Milwaukee Journal, and got approved by George, but not by another person in the approval process. And I said, well, Mr. Compte, shall I run it? He said, I'm not giving you permission to run it. I'm telling you you're ordered to run it. And I thought, wow, that's a strong guy.
He started at WTMJ as a radio announcer back in the 1930s. And this was when announcers on the air on radio wore tuxedos, because it helped exude a professional image and create a professional attitude on how you speak to the public in front of a radio microphone. Things obviously back then were very prim, very proper, and he exuded that concept of prim and proper through his entire life in broadcasting.
George Compte was a radio announcer of the old school. We had a beautiful, deep voice. I remember growing up in Green Bay listening to him as a kid. In 1966, on the 40th anniversary of the journal stations, WTMJ Radio and TV, it was the year that we put on a new studio, a big round TV studio. We also produced a radio program. And at the very end of that, the announcer, Gordon Hinckley, said, you know, well, there you have it. That's our history for the first 40 years. Now, what's coming? What's in the future? Here to talk about that is George Compte, our general manager. And if I may quote briefly from what Mr. Compte said at that time, he said, I believe we will see a combination form of radio and TV tied to what we might call home computers, which will not only enable us to get sight and sound at will, but to store and recall at our leisure all of the enjoyment and information that we could desire at any given moment. But George Compte, he was a visionary, and he foresaw this coming.
In 1974, when WTMJ FM turned a new leaf and became WKTI FM, I had the honor of recording the transition announcement with George Compte, where he, in a very proper announcing voice, well-rounded vowels and all that sort of thing, had to announce that WTMJ FM was leaving the air to come on as WKTI non-stop stereo rock. And he was very articulate in saying that line, because this was a concept that was not in his background.
Somewhere in the first year that I was doing a show at Channel 4, it's called Jim Peck's Hotline. And my boss came to me and said, Mr. Compte would like to be on your show. I said, okay, I think we can find room for him. And it was always Mr. Compte. We got on the set, and just before we went on, he said, no, Jim, call me George. Well, I Georged him up one side and down the other. George, it's so nice to have you. We've got George Compte here, and George is such a... Got all finished with the show. George, thank you very much. Thank you, Jim. It was very nice. George, I look forward to seeing you again. Next time I saw him was, good morning, Mr. Compte. Good morning, Jim. And that was it. And he was delightful. I got to know Mr. Compte. I knew him well enough to call him by his first name, Mr. When I came to WTMJ television in 1970, and he was the general manager. And he was a rather reserved man, always suit and tie, his wonderful voice. He was, good morning, Jim. Good morning, Mr. Compte. And He'd been a broadcaster, and I knew him from that because I listened to him on the radio and saw him on television. He was one of the first people I ever saw work without his toupee. He always wore one. And then at a certain point he said, the heck with it, I don't need this.
When he finally gave up his on-the-air work on television in 1952, he said, I cut up the toupee that I used to wear on TV and made a mustache and a goatee to wear to a cocktail party.
One of the interesting things about George Compte is he wrote a song. I went for a walk in Oconomowoc. Not among the great songs of all time, doesn't rate with Noel Coward, but it was a cute song. I went for a walk in Oconomowoc, Oconomowoc, Oconomowoc. I went for a walk in Oconomowoc. And he told a little story about meeting this girl. That's the way he met his wife, and that's who he was writing about.
He was once asked what he considered to be his greatest accomplishments during his time at WTMJ, and he listed two things. He said, first, whatever influence I had on the development of broadcast journalism, including in-house news departments that went out and gathered the news, and served the station and the community. And the second one, in relation to WTMJ, radio and TV, was the separation of the broadcast properties of the company from the newspaper properties with separate editorial policy.
George Compte was a great person to work for because he understood what we did. He didn't look at us as though we were just sort of these people that ran around. He had done it. He knew what it took to be a broadcaster. And it was more than just having a good voice or having a good look. You had to project something. And he always appreciated that. And he was very generous to talent.
George Compte belongs in the WBA Hall of Fame because he, again, was the ultimate leader in a time when there weren't many leaders in the broadcast industry, let alone in the state of Wisconsin. He brought things forward tremendously. Great things happened while he was at WTMJ.
Mr. Compte deserves to be in the Hall of Fame because he built that station. He built the entire television side of it. There hadn't been a television side. He came up in radio, went into management, and he put the people in place and oversaw all the hiring and raised that station to a preeminent position. It would not have happened without him.
He was a giant in the industry. He was on a lot of big boards and committees of national significance, the NAB and so forth. And yeah, he was a good man.